Hey everybody, we are going to continue the training at FACS here with talking about how to maximize your billing as a therapist within the agency. This is such an important topic. Because really the money that you bring in as an employee of FACS helps run and sustain FACS. As you probably know, if you did not have money coming into your own financial world or your checking account and you were trying to do things like buy things without money in there, you would likely experience extreme difficulties as a result, and businesses are no different. Money needs to be coming in order to keep the doors open, and for FACS to operate in a way that is helpful both for our clients that we serve as well as the staff that are part of our family here at FACS. And so some things to keep in mind with this is that although I know you didn't go to school to learn billing is an important part of what happens here at FACS. And so we are considered a nonprofit, so money generated by staff contributes really to the bottom line at FACS, and that's higher quality services for families as well as better benefits for employees. So being able to do billing in a way that sustains the agency itself can help but benefit both our staff as well as the clients we serve. So some things to keep in mind: always, and I emphasize always, bill third-party insurance wherever possible. This should be the first thing that pops in your head when you're billing a particular service line. Second thing is that there are a number of programs that have grants or county funding associated with them. Those can be billed, but only as a secondary payment source in most cases. And as always, please make sure your billing is ethical and based on actual services rendered. Anything else is bad and is considered fraud. So here's some ways that you can improve your overall billing within FACS. First one is this idea of stacking codes. And this refers to when you're meeting with a client, particularly for an extended period of time, you're often providing multiple sources of either information or services during the time you're there. For instance, you may meet for some time with the child themselves. You may then meet with the parents by themselves. So there's any number of things that you do during a visit that could actually be broken into different codes. There's two primary ways this is done. One is by stacking codes, meaning putting two separate services together as part of one visit, or this idea of interactive complexity, which means that some visits are complicated by how our clients are responding within the session or the tools we need in order to complete that session with the client. And so this is an add-on code that can be used with certain codes to help improve and increase the amount that can be billed during that session. Now, I realize that our billing system is complicated. You need to be thinking, however, as a clinician about your clinical rationale for your billing. For instance, if you are wanting to stack codes, why are you doing it that way? Now, we don't want you to be stacking codes just to be stacking codes, but if you can legitimately put two services within one visit, we want you to be billing that way. So there are some things to know with some of these codes is that the family members can be part of sessions even if it's considered an individual code, and we'll cover that in just a few moments, but you need to really be thinking through your billing in order to really bill it the best way possible. There are some codes that are called session-based codes and some that are called time-based codes, and you need to be aware of some of these differences. Most codes are time-based codes. The individual codes like the 90832, 34, and 37 are all time-based. For instance, the 32 is something like 16 to 32 minutes. Don't quote me on that. The 34 is probably 31 to 52 minutes, and the 37 is 53 minutes plus. So again, those are based on time. There are some codes that are based just on session, meaning you could do a family therapy code without the client, the 90846, and see the family for 20 minutes, and you can bill the full rate for that. Now, you could also spend an hour and a half with the family, which you could also do as part of a family therapy code, but it doesn't pay more. So be aware that session-based codes are just based on any time that you meet with the client, irregardless of the time, actual time spent, whereas the time-based codes are based on a specific set time criteria that are part of those billings. Extended DAs. As you know, extended DAs require 3 different visits in order to gather the information required. You don't have to meet for a required length of time for these 3 visits. So for instance, you may meet the first visit with the family for, let's say, an hour and 20 minutes. Your second meeting may be a half-hour observation at the school, and the third visit might be a visit with a child care provider who is actively involved with the child. So within those, and that session may last, let's say, 40 minutes. So you don't necessarily have to spend, for instance, an hour on each of those sessions. Keeping it briefer obviously would be better time-wise, because it takes a considerable amount of time to write up an extended DA. So just be aware that spending more time than is actually required to get the DA done is likely not productive overall. So, some things to also be considering regarding billing the DA. The DA is complete and billed the day your supervisor co-signs the note. That may not be the dates you actually saw the client. So remember that you cannot bill insurance for other billings on the day you are billing the diagnostic assessment. So for instance, if the diagnostic session is signed off by your supervisor on the 1st of November, you cannot bill another service that day, such as a family session, 90847, or an individual code. So just be aware of that when you're adding time. You can bill for one non-DA session before the DA is completed. So if you're having to actually have some sort of contact with the family, that can be done on a different day prior to the DA being completed. Interactive complexity. This was the code I was mentioning before. It can be primarily used on the 90832, 34, and 37 codes. Early childhood uses this code a lot because it's often used to help in communication. For instance, when play therapy objects are needed to help the child communicate what they are experiencing, or if there is extreme emotional dysregulation with the client, or in instances where, for instance, child protection needs to be called, or other high states of disorder and chaos that may occur during a session. So this does not require a separate note, but you do need to note on the actual case note that you use the interactive complexity code, and that is a checkbox, and there's a couple things you have to check after you check the box on the case note to indicate why you used the interactive complexity code. The nice thing about this adds approximately $16 or so per session that can be billed just based on the complexity of the session itself. Now, this is the stacking part. You can bill multiple services on the same day. For instance, you can't bill multiple individual codes, but you could do an individual code with a family code. You could do a skills code with a therapy code. You just can't bill, in almost all circumstances, 2 family codes on the same day. That is the 90846 and the 90847. That will be rejected by the insurer if you do that. Extended sessions. If you have long individual sessions, you can first bill that as a 90837, which is typically individual sessions for 53 minutes or longer. There is an extended therapy code. It's not something we've used a lot. It's 99354. And so basically when services are extending beyond 75 minutes, you can use that code as an add-on code. And remember, within the 90837 and 34 for that matter, you can have family members part of the session even though it is an individual code. So consider this. Family contacts have a little less flexibility. So first, you need to consider if my contact with the family is sporadic during the time I'm there, could this be billed perhaps as a 90837 code? The other consideration is, can I bill family psychoeducation H2027 as part of the time I spent with the family? If it was particularly chaotic or you were intervening on a crisis level with the family, might a crisis code be more appropriate? Or, like we mentioned before, can skills be billed along with therapy? Now, the nice changes that have occurred over the last couple years have allowed us as therapists to bill additional services that we were not able to bill for previously. Some of the more newer ones are being able to bill review of treatment plans, the H0032, as well as the scoring of the STQ and CASI. A coordination of care has been another huge benefit since we are a very systemic-based agency and are frequently talking with collaterals involved with the family. And many of the cases we work with, particularly in-home cases, families with high needs, we can use the H2015 in crisis planning. Now, this is different than crisis intervention. Usually in crisis planning, you are helping to set up the crisis plans with these families. And again, they should be done within the first 30 days of service. So some things to keep in mind when county or grant funding is involved. These services can be billed, although primarily we want to be billing insurance first. We particularly can utilize these when we're addressing factors We're addressing factors that are directly related or not directly related to the child. These can include things like if you're working primarily with a parent around their mental health, if there are issues that among family members, for instance, siblings that may not directly impact the child but still are impacting the functioning, those would all be things not probably directly billable to insurance. In some of these situations, commercial insurance in particular, they don't pay for some of the things I just mentioned, such as the completion of the CASI and STQ scoring or things like that. And so we may need to be billing county or grant funding for that. So, and at times we may need to bill third-party insurers first, receive a denial before we can bill those other sources. So if you are unsure about those things, please check with your supervisor regarding those billing issues. And as a final thought, thanks for all you do. I certainly realize that our billing is complicated. There's some things you can do to help, particularly when you're doing time entry. Make sure you have a list of codes by you when entering time. This will help you understand what's available to you in a list of codes. These can be found on the VPN, so if you want to print a copy off of that. Bill frequently, meaning oftentimes we can get billing faster out the door if you are billing more frequently than the minimum or the maximum required, which is really billing needs to be completed on a weekly basis, particularly last week's being billed by the next Tuesday morning. And finally, you can help admin a ton to review your billing for errors. The way you can do this is if you look in your time entry for the week once it's completed, and if you see any black boxes in your time entry, they are showing errors. Some of those can be corrected by you, some may not, but note that many of them you can fix, particularly if there's a fraction problem, or if a client does not have an authorization, you may need to be seeking that out. So basically, keeping billing errors to a minimum help so that admin staff do not have to spend an inordinate amount of time tracking those things down. And then finally, just make sure that there is travel billed with every in-home session, because you cannot bill travel separate from a date of service in the home. Well, I hope this was helpful. If you have any further questions, please talk with your coordinator or supervisor, or I'd be happy to answer any further questions for you. Thanks and have a great day.